Good morning, and welcome to the Museum of the San Ramon Valley's virtual speaker series. I'm Dan Dunn, the director of the museum. We are almost 2 years into the programs in this series. Past presentations have included California's First People Then and Now, the Sonora Water Temple, and last month, the history of the S&A studios and the silent film industry in Niles. We hope you have enjoyed this series. We know John Muir for his efforts to save Yosemite and the Redwoods, but did you know he was a world traveler as well? We're happy to have back Garrett Dailey, John Muir scholar, to tell us about Muir, the explorer, the traveler, and his exploits. Please use the chat window at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you have, and we'll answer them during at the end of the presentation. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome back Garrett Dailey. Garrett?
Hey, hi, Dan. How are you? Well, let's see here. Excuse me 1 second while we get this. There we go. Well, thank you for inviting me back. I hope that you had an opportunity to watch the first version of my presentation back last May on the life of John Muir, where we traced his life from his birth in Dunbar, Scotland, through his death in 1914 here in California. Now, when we think of John Muir, we think of him as the naturalist, the preservationist, the person for whom we have to thank for Yosemite Park and Yosemite Valley. He is known, again, for so many things, but we tend to associate him with California. He is officially been voted California's most famous resident. This is the California Quarter, which each state was able to design to tell the world really what's special about their state. And look what's on ours. We have, of course, Half Dome from Yosemite. We have the California condor. We have a sequoia, and we have a Scott. We have John Muir. But Muir, although we associate him with California, he had, if there was ever anybody who had the wanderlust gene, it would have been John Muir. The famous naturalist, John Burroughs, who we will hear more from in the next hour, said that John Muir could not sit in the corner of a landscape as Thoreau did. He must have a continent for his playground. Muir thought a little bigger than that. He said, my life work is all over the world, all over the world. Well, we can't really talk about John Muir's travels without talking about someone who really helped make them possible, namely his wife, Louisa, better known as Louis Strensel. Now, Louis is absolutely a remarkable woman. And if there's any woman ever born that was made for John Muir, it was Louis, but not for the reason you think, not because she loved to share his adventures, but because really, well, she didn't. She loved to be at home, to take care of their daughters, but she also recognized that John needed to be in the wilderness. And she was always instrumental in helping him return to the wilderness and to continue his exploration. She, again, a remarkable woman. She's an educated woman, a graduate of what will later become Mills College, a accomplished pianist. She said repeatedly could have been a concert pianist. She's known for her kindness, gentle nature. She's attractive, and she just happens to be wealthy. She's the daughter of John T. Strensel, Dr. Strensel, a Polish immigrant who is both trained in medicine and horticulture and had a large and very profitable ranch in the Alhambra Valley. Today, we know Martinez. Well, in 1874, she's introduced to John Muir by Jean Carr, who you'll remember from the May presentation, was truly, really John Muir's muse and instrumental in shaping his career. She knew, Jean Carr, that these two people were meant to be together. Now, in 1874, Louis is 27, Muir is 36. He's already a well-known writer, having published dozens of national articles. But John, he's a brilliant man, but he's not the swiftest person. It takes him 5 years to get around to proposing to Louis. She gleefully accepts. The Strensels are thrilled. And so Muir celebrates, well, what would you expect, by heading north to Alaska. And he will take his first of 7 voyages to Alaska. Now, we're going to cover these in order, and then we'll have to backtrack for some of his other adventures, but let's deal with the Alaskan adventures one at a time. 1879, right after he gets engaged, this is his first voyage, and he utterly enchanted by the wilderness beauty that he sees there. They dock in Fort Wrangell, where he meets someone who will become a good friend, a young Presbyterian minister named Hall Young. He and Reverend Young will share many adventures together. They then head north on a steamship, the Cassiar. On board are a number of other evangelists from the Presbyterian faith, who Muir will kind of dismissively call the divines. That's all right. They called him the Wild Muir, so there was no love lost between them. Anyway, the divines are headed north with Reverend Young to save the souls of the natives in Alaska. They drop anchor in Glenora. They have to wait for favorable winds, so they're going to be there a day or two. Muir looks around. Hey, there's a mountain. Guess what Muir does when he sees a mountain? He's off to climb it, and Hall Young decides to come along with him. Now, when they hit the summit of the mountain, or just shy of it, there's 1,000-foot sheer ice cliff. At that point, Young, if left to his own, would have turned around, but he sees Muir scamper up it, so he figures, well, if he can do it, I can do it. Well, as he gets to the top and tries to jump over a crevasse, Muir had shouted a warning to him, which he didn't hear. And when he does, he lands on a rock that then gives way. He falls, grabs the edge to keep from falling into to his death, really. Dislocates his shoulders when he does that, screams. Muir comes, reaches over, grabs him by the belt, pulls him back up. Now they're at the top of this mountain with a sheer ice cliff to get down. So Muir was able to set one of Hall's shoulders, but not the other one. And so literally has to lower him down this 1,000-foot cliff, one step at a time, and then almost not carry him, but help him back to the ship. Takes them all night. They don't arrive until the next morning. Now, Muir is credited with saving a number of lives of people that he hiked with over the years, and he never wrote about them. You only learn about them because of the writings of the people involved. This one's somewhat of an exception, and the reason is because Young writes about it, and then others pick up the story, and pretty soon it gets exaggerated to the point where Muir has to come in and sort of, bring it back down to reality, that no, he was not the Superman that they were trying to portray him as. Anyway, when the divines heads south and Muir and Young are there left alone, Muir has heard about some wondrous sights to the north, and he enlists some local Indians to help guide them there. And they're going to travel in an open canoe. They get 4 Indians to guide and paddle with them, and off they go on this grand adventure. The Indians will come to respect Muir greatly. They give him the honorary title of Great Ice Chief. He, on the other hand, will, he also will come to respect them greatly. And he really is in tune with their paganism because they view nature and God as sort of the same thing. And he is in tune with he calls it their instinct with deity, instinct with deity. And he feels that they're more closely understood the concept of the immanent living principle in all matter than do Christians. He really identifies with them and their view of nature. On this trip, they will enter what we now know as Glacier Bay. Muir and Young are the first white men to ever see it. The Indians hadn't seen it either, these Indians anyway. Along this trip, there will be many instances where, to put it, say it was dicey, put it mildly, the Indians often in fear. Why? Because they're smart. They look at the situation and say, we don't really want to go here. And Muir would always calm them down and convince them. And he says, God has always told me when I have gone as far as I can go. God always tells me when it's time to turn back. And with some great confidence and maybe a bit of bravado, he says to them, you will always have good luck when you travel with me. Now, the leader of the Indians, a man called Chief Toyette, after listening to Muir, declares that his heart is strong once more and they will go forward, and then says, if they are to die, the ice chief would be a good companion with whom to enter the next life. So this is Glacier Bay. And if you've ever taken a cruise to Alaska, you just, the cruise ships now enter it and you just marvel at its beauty. And you can just imagine what it must have been like for Muir and Young and the Indians to see this for the first time. Well, the expedition continued, and Muir finding and naming glaciers along the way, names a couple of them for Scottish geologists, one for the famed Hugh Miller. When the weather got bad, as it often did, by the way, this is taking place in October, so this is a very dicey time of the year up there. When the weather got too bad to travel in canoe, they would beach and make camp, and Muir would go off on his own exploring. They visited many tribal villages. They would spend time there, and Muir would get to know them. And he would preach that they were all brothers, regardless of color. They bonded with him. They actually would beg him to return to be their teacher. He returns to California immediately after that, and he and Louis are married. He begins managing the ranch at that point for Dr. Strensel. The arrangement he has with Louis is that between July and October of each year, that's a slow period before, after everything's taken care of, the pruning and planting, and then between the harvest, that would be his time to ramble in the wilderness. But over the years, from 1880 until about 1888 are what Muir aficionados call John Muir's lost years. During this time, he writes almost nothing. He travels very little. He does take some trips to Alaska, but his trips and exploration of California are very limited. Again, almost no writing. These are, like I said, considered his lost years. But what will happen during this time is there will be a pattern, and that is that Muir becomes ill. Whether it's depression or not, we don't know, but he literally will become physically ill. And Louis, recognizing this of John, will beg him to return to the mountains. Anyway, his next trip to Alaska comes shortly after, in the same year, 1880. Again, he travels and he meets up with Hall Young. Now, Hall Young has a dog called Stikeen, and this is a scraggly little terrier. And Muir looks at it. What is this? This isn't really a dog. This is, he's dismissive of this dog, but the dog takes an instant liking to John Muir, and they will go and they'll explore the Taylor Glacier. And the the adventure that the two of them have. Okay, as Muir gets up early in the morning to leave, and Stikeen follows him, and he keeps trying to shoo the dog back, and Stikeen will have none of it, is going to follow him. And that what happens over the next day is this incredible adventure where both of them are almost killed on this glacier. Huge crevasses will open up and trap them. And anyway, Muir is able to get back by descending down into one of the crevasses, walking along about a 3-inch ledge to the other side, cutting steps up to get back. And Stikeen's on the other side, whimpering, afraid to follow him. And just like Chief Toyette, Muir's confidence, he's able to cajole Stikeen down. They, finally gets down, follows him. Anyway, what happens is that he writes a book about their adventure called Stikeen, and it becomes one of the most popular children's novels of the early 1900s, and is even today considered one of the greatest animal adventure stories. He spends a week exploring a grand glacier that has been named, not by him, but has been named the Muir Glacier in his honor. So he spends a week surveying it. He and Hall will measure an ice flow. They'll put stakes in, and they measure that the ice flow is 50 to 60 feet in 24 hours. It's literally a river of ice. But he couldn't convince the Indians to join him. They're not there. But who did join him? Stikeen. Now, Muir wrapped the wee doggy's paws in cloth to protect them, as you'll see he needed to do. This is what the Muir Glacier looked like in 1890. This is a more colorful picture of it. Unfortunately, it does not look like this today, because here you can see the glacier. Okay, as I was saying, you can see the glacier flowing into Glacier Bay. It doesn't do that anymore. It stops several miles from it because of global warming. But anyway, to give you an example of just how dangerous it was, an idea of how dangerous it was to explore this, this is a picture of its surface. I mean, imagine walking on that, and imagine a little terrier trying to walk on that. And some other pictures from that time, again, to give you an idea of just how rugged this was that Muir, Hall, and Stikeen were exploring. Anyway, what happened to Stikeen? We don't know. It's a sad story. As Hall was about to leave and they were parting ways. They were sitting on the dock in Sitka. Muir sitting there with Stikeen in his lap. Stikeen knowing that something bad was about to happen, and Muir petting him, telling that he's a brave wee doggy. Anyway, Young and Stikeen get into a canoe, paddle away. Stikeen's at the aft, looking back at Muir, whining and crying as they paddle off into the distance. They would never meet again. Shortly after that, somebody steals Stikeen, and no one knows what happened to him. Muir writes that he got a renewed faith in the humanity of his horizontal brothers, and noted that they have the same passions and power to reason as does the vertical mammal. He enlarged my life, extended its boundaries. In 1881, he's asked to join another expedition up to Alaska. This one on the Thomas Corwin. This is not a voyage of exploration. This is actually a rescue mission. A steamer, Jeannette, 2 years earlier, left on a polar expedition and was never heard from again. What happened was sort of a precursor, if you will, to Shackleton's historic, tragic 1915 Antarctic expedition. The Jeannette got caught in the ice, crushed, and its crew fought for survival. Unfortunately, unlike Shackleton's, Jeannette's did not turn out as well, and only a few members of the crew ultimately survived. Now, the Corwin's voyage, they found no evidence of the Jeannette, but because it was so wide ranging, Muir gets lots of time to explore. Now, this is really an important trip for him because he gets to see native villages all around the Arctic, and he gets to compare them, and he's comparing their health and vibrancy, and he traces that to their dependence on white men's goods and technology. And what he finds is that those who are independent of white man's economy are happier, more noble, and fare better than those who are dependent on it, who oftentimes are living in squalor, but with lots of white man's trinkets. He finds some villages that have literally starved to death. The village gone, and literally the people, lying on the ice. So, I mean, what happened? And what he determined, what he surmised, is that these villages that didn't survive, they didn't survive because they had been, they would trade for white men's goods, especially rifles and ammunition. What do you do with rifles and ammunition? If you're a hunting society, you hunt. And what would happen is they would shoot literally all of the game, because they would then take the pelts and use the pelts to trade for more goods. But when they did that, they ended up destroying their own food supply, and they would literally starve to death. Other villages, it was the white men who would come in and destroy and decimate the animal population. So, the further they moved away from the white man's civilization, the more noble he found the Indians to be. The Inupiats, he said, are better behaved than white men, not half as greedy, shameless, or dishonest. And he said, these people interest me greatly. It is worth coming far to know them, however slightly. There is a response in their eyes which make you feel that they are your very brothers. Well, in 1890, again, he's ill again. So now a fourth trip to Alaska is in order. His physician, he's really sick. And his physician says, no, you can't go on this one. It's likely to kill you. Muir says, if I don't go, I will die. And he goes. And what happens? The same pattern that continues throughout his life. He's sick in the flatlands. He gets into either the mountains or, in this case, the wilderness of Alaska, and his health miraculously revives. Here he says, no microbe could survive in this icy world. Here he takes a 10-day solo expedition, again, exploring the Muir Glacier. On one of the days, there's he's walking across the snow. Turns out it's a thin layer of snow over a crevasse. He falls in to the icy water below. Somehow or other is able to pull himself out, get back up onto the ice, take off his freezing clothes, climb into a sleeping bag. Anyway, as he writes about it, as he often does, he says, quote, it might have been worse. It might have been worse. By the way, these sayings sound a whole lot better when said with the Scottish accent that John Muir had all his life, by the way. He never lost his Scottish accent. In 1896, he takes a quick two-week trip up there. The following year, 97, this is his sixth trip. Now, this one is supposed to be a true vacation. He's not there to explore. He's just there to enjoy himself. But this is when the gold rush starts. The Hearst newspapers cable him and ask him to report on the rush, just to actually go and accompany the miners into the Yukon and be their man on the scene. He responds to say, do they think I'm daft like anyway? That was his, I thought I knew what that meant. So instead I contacted my friend Fergus, who is my source of knowledge of all things Scottish. And this is the translation. Do you think I'm stupid like the rest of those poor folks? Anyway, he reconsidered and thought, you know, if I had actually done that and told people what was really happening, maybe I could slow down the rush if people knew the truth. Anyway, speaking of, again, you know, my friend Fergus, here's a picture I took of him and another Scot. I call it two infamous Scots at Yosemite. But again, thank you, Fergus, for your assistance. But I digress. Let's talk about his seventh trip to Alaska. This is with the Harriman expedition. Now, E.H. Harriman is one of the richest men in the world. Those I date myself by saying, do you remember the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid movie with Paul Newman and Robert Redford, where they're sticking up the train and the clerk inside, Woodcock, announces that he can't open the door because he is employed by E.H. Harriman. Well, this is E.H. Harriman, and he is a railroad magnate and financier, and like I said, one of the richest men in the world. And he becomes a great friend and sponsor of John Muir. He not only will sponsor some of his trips, but we have Harriman to thank for Muir's autobiography, or at least a portion of it, the story of my boyhood and youth. Muir was up visiting Harriman's estate, and Harriman refused to let him leave until he actually dictated the autobiography. And Harriman assigned his secretary to follow him, and the secretary took it down longhand as Muir dictated it. Anyway, Harriman was ordered by his doctor to take a vacation, and Harriman didn't do things the way everybody else did. He said, well, if I have to take a vacation, I'll take a few friends with me. So he organizes the Harriman expedition to Alaska in 1899. And he's going to take with him as many scientific explorers, artists, authors, hunters as he can, and the necessary people to assist them. Included will be John Burroughs, who I've mentioned earlier. He is a good friend of John Muir's. He is a noted naturalist himself, and of course, John Muir will accompany them. Muir says, this made a rare company assembled for work in a magnificent wilderness under the most favorable auspices. Unlike his other ones, this is a luxury cruise on Harriman's personal yacht. So, you know, this is different. But here are a picture of the two Johnnies. They, like I said, they are very good friends. They met in 1893 in New York. They didn't get off to the best start. Muir would write, Burroughs gave no sign of his fine qualities, but they later would become inseparable. That's what it says. Their relationship is a little, maybe like two brothers who love each other but have a contentious relationship. It would often be said that their relationship was best when there was a continent between them, but they would travel together and they were lifelong friends. At dinner one night, there's a discussion going on. Now, remember, this is a grand dining room on this yacht. You've got the 25 famous people around there. Mr. Harriman, of course, at the head of the table. And Muir announces to the assembled throngs that he is richer than E.H. Harriman. And somebody says to him, but John, how can you say that? Mr. Harriman is the richest man in the world, or one of the richest men in the world. And Muir responds, I don't think Mr. Harriman is very rich. He has not as much money as I have. I have all I want, and Mr. Harriman has not. Harriman, though, amused by this, responds, I've never cared for money except as power for work. What I most enjoy is the power of creation, getting into partnership with nature in doing good, helping to feed man and beast, and making everybody and everything a little better. Okay, well, I'm now going to digress back to 1893, because those are the Muir's explorations in Alaska. Let's talk about his trips around the world. His first one is in 1893, and here he's supposed to travel with fellow Scot and famed wildlife artist William Keith. Unfortunately, Keith is a wonderful friend, and they've shared many, many adventures together, but it doesn't quite work out. So Muir goes alone. He'll briefly stop by the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. Not impressed by this. Even remember, this is the one that Tesla lit up, a very famous fair. Muir thought it a cosmopolitan rat race. On to New York City, where he's going to meet up with Robert Underwood Johnson. Now, Mr. Johnson is the editor of the Century magazine. This is one of the most popular magazines in the country at the time, over 1 million readers. And Muir's been writing for the Century as well as Overland magazine. And Johnson, really one of his sponsors. He introduces Muir all around, and he meets people like Mark Twain, Rudyard Kipling, Nikola Tesla, many others. And what does Muir find? He's shocked to find that they all want to meet him. He's the celebrity, not them. They want to meet him. And he says, this is weird, considering how little I have written. He's incredibly prolific, but again, that's how he views himself, how little I have written. Why? Because he looked not at what he had done, he looked at what he had yet to do. And he had so much yet to do. He had accomplished in his mind so little. Anyway, while in New England, he has to stop by to see Thoreau and Emerson's graves. Emerson, both of these men had huge impact on him. Emerson would actually travel to Yosemite to meet Muir. Imagine that. Ralph Waldo Emerson went across the country to be shown Yosemite by John Muir. So he goes to Sleepy Hollow to visit their graves. Of course, he has to stop by Walden Pond. He says, I could have lived there for 200 years. Forget the 2 years that Thoreau lived there. I could have lived there 200 years. Now he's off to England. His first objective is his home in Dunbar. He wants to visit his childhood home. He wants to visit Edinburgh. He says, quote, I am a Scotchman and I am home again. So what does he do? Same thing I did, Lynn and I, when we went to Edinburgh the first time, what did we do? Well, we went to the castle, we went to the Royal Mile, we climbed Arthur's Seat, the same thing. He's a tourist, His opinion of Edinburgh, quote, the most beautiful town I've ever seen. Now notice, he thought Chicago was a cosmopolitan rat race, Edinburgh, the most beautiful city I have ever seen. I think we would both agree with that, Lynn and myself. He gets to Dunbar. He visits the Lorne Temperance Hotel. That was his father's shop. When they lived there, they lived above the shop. It's now been turned into a hotel. He says, the waves made grand songs, the same old songs they sang to me in my childhood, and I seemed a boy again. Then on to Dumfries. That's where Robert Burns, Scotland's poet laureate and Muir's favorite poet, had died there. Glasgow, Loch Lomond, Oban, the Western Isles. Again, he is a tourist. The overcast skies, cold sea, and heather remind him of Alaska. The beauty of it reminds him of Alaska, but he's candid and he admits, but nowhere as grand as Alaska. Then to the Lake District of England to see Wordsworth, A Home London Grave. Again, a tourist. Now, this is a funny story. He is supposed to meet a member of Parliament at the House of Commons. Again, he's this huge celebrity. They want to bring him in and introduce him in the House of Commons. But he presents his card to the attendant who wasn't in on this plan. And the attendant looks at this man in his long beard and his, Muir was never one to dress finely, so he's in rough clothing, dismissively sends him to an anteroom. Well, Muir is insulted by that, turns and walks out. The card is later presented to the MP in the House of Commons, who is excited, runs out to find that Muir has left. His impression of London, a huge and lonely wilderness. Again, just juxtapose that to Edinburgh. Westminster Abbey, a grand church full of curious looking, odd fashioned people made out of stone. Not impressed. The Tower of London, a huge castle full of guns and swords and shields and armor and 1,000 queer things I have no room to write about. Well, okay. Well, again, this type of thing does not impress John Muir. Anyway, the House of Commons get another shot at him. This time, Sir Joseph Hooker makes sure to meet him and brings him into the chambers again, where he is acknowledged and honored by the other members of Parliament. Again, just to give you an idea of how important this man was internationally as well as nationally. Another visit to his home in Dunbar. This time, he is dismayed to see the poverty that exists there. And thereafter, he'll make $100 a year donation at Christmas to help the poor, to be distributed among the poor at Dunbar. $100 in the 1890s goes a whole lot further than $100 does today. Now, was there anything that he did like there? Well, the answer is, of course. Then it was off to Norway and Switzerland, and Italy. He loved the mountains, he loved the wilderness, and that impressed him. Now, then it was to France. Now, as you may recall from our first discussion, by the age of 11, Muir could read and was literate in French. He could read it and write it. He knew the rules of grammar, but it turns out he couldn't speak a word of it. When he got to France, he couldn't understand them. They couldn't understand him. He said, even the dogs don't understand it as I speak it. He returns from this trip to California. His first book, The Mountains of California, is published to a huge success. It's a great acclaim, very, very successful, and it will solidify the growing conservation movement in the United States. Now, just to put it into perspective, remember, after this trip come his 5th, 6th, and 7th trips to Alaska, which we've already talked about. Now, in 1903, he has scheduled a trip around the world. He's going to take it with a renowned Harvard botanist named Charles Sargent and their son. Well, they're about to leave, and he gets a message from President Theodore Roosevelt that Roosevelt wants him to guide him through Yosemite. And Muir says, sorry, Teddy, I'm busy. And, Roosevelt will have none of that, insists that no, Muir will guide him. So the trip around the world is delayed. And what happens then, of course, we talked about it some detail before, is history's most important camping trip. That trip will turn Theodore Roosevelt into the great conservation president that he became, and Roosevelt, of course, responsible for preserving millions and millions of acres of forest land for the future. So Muir's world tour is just that. It starts in London and goes all across the world. It is a one-year trip. Now, E.H. Harriman will partially fund the trip and tells him, if there's anything at all you need, you let me know. Muir says, I am already unconscionably deep in your debt, to which Mr. Harriman responds, you can't keep accounts of that kind. Pass them along anywhere you can, anywhere you get the chance. In other words, pay it forward. So, well, the purpose of the trip is ostensibly to collect rare Asian plants for the Arnold Arboretum. That's just a cover story. It's a grand world tour. That's what it is. Now, it doesn't start auspiciously. They get to Liverpool, and it turns out that Mr. Sargent, Dr. Sargent, had said to Muir, I'll take care of our travel documents. So Muir gives him his passport, which Sargent promptly loses. So when they get to Liverpool, they're stuck there. And that's sad, because Muir had planned another trip to Dunbar, and another Scot you may have heard of, Andrew Carnegie. We know him as Carnegie, but he called himself Carnegie, had invited Muir to visit him in his Skibo Castle in Scotland, but they were stuck in Livermore until they could get replacement travel documents. So they have whirlwind tours of Paris, Amsterdam, Berlin, St. Petersburg. Muir's response is, I've seen enough museums and art galleries to last me a lifetime. He finally finds peace, where? In the forests. The beautiful forest north of St. Petersburg. He says, no pleasure so fine is to be found in all of St. Petersburg's palaces. Then comes a railroad trip across Siberia. The Trans-Siberian Railroad is either just complete or being completed, and Muir is to cross Siberia with Sargent on the railroad. Now, you've got to remember, travel back then is very different than it is today, even though I'm sure today that trip would be strenuous. Yeah, very, very, very difficult, very trying. It doesn't help that Muir is violently ill with food poisoning. He literally has to be carried onto the train on a stretcher. On the trip, he will drop to between 90 and 100 pounds in weight. He's 5'10". They travel by ship to, when they get across a lot of Istok, then catch a ship down to Shanghai. He'll part company with the sergeants, which turns out to be a very good thing because they were not compatible traveling companions. He heads off on his own, of course, on E.H. Harriman steamships. He stops in India, where he'll travel up to the Himalayas. He gets a glimpse of Mount Everest. No, he actually didn't try to climb it. Hard to believe, but he didn't. Anyway, most interesting part of the trip, he said. From there, he travels up to Egypt, the pyramids, the Cairo, up the Nile, then back down again, now over to Australia, where now he actually is collecting some seeds for the Arboretum. Then over to New Zealand, where he's traveling around on a stagecoach. The weather is terrible. It's raining. Believe it or not, he pays an additional fare, not to travel inside, but to travel outside. He pays an additional fare so he can sit up on top with the driver in this terrible storm. Anyway, there, as he had the same reaction to the sheep that he did in Yosemite. He's distressed by the effect the sheep is having on the landscape and the deforestation of the country, but he does get a time to climb Muir Glacier and Mount Cook. Then he goes to the Philippines, Hong Kong, Canton, where he boards another Harriman liner. And oh, by the way, when he's on these liners, he's not in steerage. He's traveling first cabin. Anyway, then it's up to Japan, Nagasaki, Yokohama. What he notes in Yokohama are not just the beautiful Japanese gardens, but the massive, mighty Japanese battleships. This is 1903. 1904, the Russo-Japanese War will break out. So anyway, that's what he sees there. And then Hawaii. After that, he's back home. He's back to 150 pounds, actually as heavy as he's been in his entire life. He's in robust health, gone for a year. Okay, now his last trip is one I just need to take a minute and set the stage for. Let's go back to 1867. He's 29 years old. He's left Indianapolis. He was working in a factory there, had an accident that temporarily blinded him. He makes the monumental decision to give up his engineering career and become a naturalist, takes the 1,000-mile trip, walking through the South down to the Gulf, where he is to catch a freighter to Venezuela, where he's going to continue the explorations of the great German explorer, Alexander von Humboldt. Along the way, he catches malaria, almost dies, realizes that he doesn't have the strength, so he goes instead to his second choice, and he travels to California to see the Yosemite, and of course, the rest is history. But he never gives up his desire to see the Amazon. So we're now 1910. He says, have I forgotten the Amazon, the Earth's greatest river? Never, never, never. It has been burning in me a half a century and will burn forever. So it's actually 1911. It's now or never. He is 73 years of age. Now, he lost his wife, Louie, about 8 years earlier to pneumonia. So he's now going to go and fulfill a dream that's been in him for 50 years. So he travels east to New York and Washington. While he's there, let's see, what should I do in Washington? I think I'll drop in on the president. So he knocks at the White House door, drops in on President Taft, President Taft, of course, succeeded President Roosevelt. Muir had the opportunity to guide Taft through Yosemite 2 years earlier. Very different experience because Taft was 350 pounds, very different experience than Roosevelt. But anyway, lobbies Taft on behalf of saving Hetch Hetchy, meets with lawmakers, then travels up to Boston to meet with his publishers. While there, shoot, I think I'll stop by Connecticut and Yale and pick up an honorary doctorate degree. Then to New York. While there, he completes his manuscript on the Yosemite. They then rush that into publication. And while there, he's elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Other members include people, again, like Mark Twain. He's named president of the American Alpine Club, and then finally is able to get on his way. Now, everybody is against this trip. Remember, Muir is 73 years of age. He's by this time considered to be a national treasure. And people are afraid that literally he won't survive this very, very strenuous journey. President Taft sends a communique to all of the embassies and consulates along his route of travel, instructing them to give him all aid and comfort that they can and render any assistance as might be possible. He will travel 40,000 miles, begins in August of 1911. He travels by steamship down to the mouth of the Amazon to the city we now call Belém, where the first stop, of course, no, where's he going to go? He's not there for the food. He's there to study the flowers and the trees. So first step, the botanical garden. He wants to see the Victoria Regia, which is a giant water lily. He then boards a steamship and goes 1,000 miles up the Amazon River to Manaus, and there gets on canoes and heads in search of this lily. From there, he travels down to Rio de Janeiro. Again, everywhere he goes, he's shocked to find out people are excited that he's there. He ends up being co-opted to give lectures. He's a celebrity everywhere he goes. Then it's off to Santos. He's in search of a very rare, specific tree. He travels to the heart of the Brazilian wilderness, where he actually finds a grove of them, spends an entire week studying them. And he says it's the most interesting forest I've seen in my whole life. Now, think that's coming from John Muir. And, you know, the redwoods, the sequoias, Alaska, and this is the most interesting forest he had ever seen. I kind of think sometimes it's, you know, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. I think wherever he was, he found it the most interesting. Anyway, this is a drawing of the tree that he studied and went in search of. From then back to Buenos Aires, and from there across the Andes into Chile. Here he's searching for the monkey puzzle tree. He has no idea where to find it. He searches for 500 miles, asking people, and finally finds it. It was rare. It's still a protected species. This is what the monkey puzzle tree looks like. From there back to Buenos Aires. He now wants to go to Cape Town, South Africa, to explore Africa. Unfortunately, can't get there from here. So he has to go up to Tenerife, Canary Islands, get on another boat, heading back. He's at sea for 35 days, gets to Cape Town, then travels by rail up to Victoria Falls. Here he's seeking Andesina digitata, another very, very unique tree, also known as the baobab or monkey bread tree. What's so unique about it? Well, it's short and fat. It's 75 feet tall, but 60 feet in diameter. It's like a cube, second only in girth to the giant sequoia, and known to store up to 30,000 gallons of water. Very, very unusual tree. Here's a picture of one. By the way, that's an elephant standing beside it, a full-grown elephant. So you can see just how big this tree is. From there, he travels to Kenya and then inland to Nairobi by rail to the headwaters of the Nile and Lake Victoria. Then it's through the Suez Canal to Italy, where he visits Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius. then through the Strait of Gibraltar back to New York City. And no, it was not smooth sailing, terrible storms at sea. He arrives in March of 1912, a few weeks shy of his 74th birthday. He's been gone 8 months, traveled 40,000 miles, and not sick a single day. He proclaims it to be one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. And unfortunately, this would be his last ramble. He dies a few years later, on Christmas Eve, 1914, in Los Angeles of pneumonia. And he is buried just a few miles from here in the Strensel Family Cemetery in Martinez. But Muir's legacy lives on a few years later with no small part due to his efforts. The National Park Service will be formed. Other things that he championed, like making the Grand Canyon a national park, making the Petrified Forest a national park, will come to fruition. His legacy lives on, and the dream never dies. Anyway, the more you find out about John Muir, the more fascinating the man becomes and the more remarkable. Anyway, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Dan?
Super, Garrett. You know, I was struck as you got into the later slides. We were chatting the other day about things, but I was struck as you got into the later slides. He was everywhere.
He was everywhere, and he knew everyone.
Yeah. A couple things that we had talked about the other day that I'd still like you to touch on. Louis seemed to know her husband remarkably well, and to the point where she was able to kind of give him up. Maybe that's a bad expression, but to give him up so that he could do what he needed to do.
You know, let me see if I can find, hold on one second. I found a passage. Shoot, I thought I had it here. Oh, wait a minute, wrong book, hold on. I found a passage that really sort of explains this. This is in this wonderful Pulitzer Prize winning biography of him called The Life of John Muir, Son of Wilderness. And what's unique about this this biography is that the author had access to his two daughters, and many of the anecdotes in here are directly from Helen and Wanda. So anyway, this gives you just some inkling of this. We're now talking about 1887, 1888. Remember, this is when I said the lost years. This is towards the end of that. And it says, Louis, by this time, hated the ranch for what it had done to her husband. No one knew better than he had to come to a parting of the ways. His labored, uninspired efforts on the first picturesque California articles told her that whatever divine fire he had once possessed was all but gone. He must get into the wilderness once more to recapture it. He could no longer serve two masters.
Wow. And
she understood this. This is the love of her life. And remember, and he is, his daughters, again, remember, the story comes with, basic input from his daughters. He is a loving and doting father. So it's not like he's absentee in the sense that he's gone, but when he's there, he is a devoted family man. And he was willing to give this up for his family. But Louis wouldn't have it because this isn't the man she married. She wanted to live with the man she married.
It's remarkable. So a nuts and bolts thing. I guess the Strensels were very happy with the match, and Muir seemed to have some good business sense and know how to run a ranch. But as we just kind of talked about, he couldn't survive one. So who took care of the ranch while he was away?
Well, in 1891, Muir hires his brother-in-law, John Reed, and John Reed becomes the ranch foreman. The following year, 1892, he hires his brother, David Muir, from the Midwest. Muir, David had a business that had just gone bankrupt, but he brings him in, and David takes over as the ranch manager. So you had his brother as the manager and his brother-in-law as the foreman, and they ran the ranch very successfully. And by the way, Louie, even before this, has started. She realized the ranch was killing her husband. Dr. Strenzel had died sometime earlier. She realizes the ranch is killing her husband. She starts leasing off portions of it. It's like 2,600 acres, leasing portions of it, selling other portions to, again, start to reduce John's workload. But, if have you, when you go to the ranch, this is kind of interesting. I mean, when you go to the his house in Martinez, and you look, if you look to the south, you'll see this giant trestle there. This trestle, you think, God, that is really ugly. Well, the reason it's there is because John Muir, during this period, wanted the Southern Pacific to put a train stop there to make it easier for him to get his fruit to market. So he leased them that property to build the trestle, and so they could run their line through there on the condition that they put a stop in there to facilitate his transporting his crops to market. Again, he is a keen businessman, and surprisingly enough, when he passes away, people are shocked to find out that he's also wealthy in his own right. He was worth about, in today's dollars, he was worth about $4 million when he died.
And that brings us to one of our questions, actually, from not me, but from somebody that's listening. His income during all of this traveling that he's doing, where did the income start from, so that he could do all of these rambles, besides the E.H. Harrimans and those kind of folks? Were they from writings? Were they from, where did this come from?
Well, his first article published, shortly after he gets to Yosemite, he drafts an article on glaciers in Yosemite, sends it off, and to his shock, it's published, and they send him a check for $200. Now that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money in in the 1870s, and he suddenly realizes, holy cow, I could make a living doing this. And he is a very, very prolific writer. His articles are in demand, and they're published in national. These aren't published in the local newspaper. These are published in national publications like the Century, with 1 million readers. So first, he's also a prolific lecturer. And that in and of itself, how that comes about is a really interesting story we don't have time for, but you can thank William Keith for that, his artist friend. He makes a lot of money lecturing. He's a wonderful lecturer. Then he starts taking over the ranch. And when he takes over the ranch, he's making income from that. And, again, he was very good, and it was very profitable. So again, and of course, his family, the family he married into, was quite wealthy.
Yeah.
So, money was never a problem. The other thing is what does he spend it on? He doesn't spend it. When he travels, he takes some stale bread, some tea, and he disappears for weeks at a time.
Yeah, that's true. So another thing that struck me was here's a guy that hangs out with presidents and railroad magnates, but seemingly his best traveling companions are Scruffy Dog, that he was dismissed in the beginning, and the native population that not a lot of people had a lot of good things to say about in the late 19th century.
Well, I get the impression that, he would travel with people. He and William Keith, John Burroughs, I don't know that he traveled with, but one of his good friends was, forget his first name, Sweat, the first superintendent of California education. Anyway, he ran in some really rarefied circles and would travel with really interesting people. His travels with William Keith, those tended to be in the mountains, because he would take Keith to locations where he thought this is something that Keith would want to paint, and they would travel together to the places like this. Anyway, but I agree with you. I think his best traveling companion was probably himself.
Yeah. So here's an interesting question, and maybe given that 19th century time period, was he ever sent out looking? Did he ever start out looking for something that really didn't exist? One of those legendary things that people thought existed in the world, and he got kind of pulled into that?
Yeah, you mean like the 7 golden cities or something?
There you go.
No, not to my knowledge. No,
Okay.
He went looking for, like when he went looking for the baobab tree or these trees or the lily in the Nile. I mean, he knew they were there. He'd read about them, but he wanted to see them himself. There's something you need to know about Muir, and that is when he would come across a plant that he had never seen before, he would sit down with it. He would sketch it, and he would, in his words, listen to its story. So he wanted to see, like the lily, he wanted to see it in the wild. He had seen it in the botanical garden, but he would travel 1,000 miles up the Nile specifically to see it in the wild. Now, he wasn't successful, but that's what he did, just to see the lily in the wild.
I remember reading in one of his writings, it's interesting you described his technique, because he describes and I don't remember where I read this in his writings, but he describes being able to kind of spend time with whatever it is he was looking at.
Yeah.
Sometimes days.
And
he would
listen to its story.
Yeah.
That's the important part, Dan. And listen to its story.
Yeah, I mean, he's very interesting. Why was he in Los Angeles? What was the reason for that trip in the
I believe it was to see his daughter.
Okay.
To see his daughter. The hospital he dies in is today UCLA Med Center.
This one came in as well. When Muir was in India, he traveled with a big game hunter, which we would find kind of odd, given his penchant for the natural world, taking care of the plants and animals. His horizontal brothers, that he called them at one point. Do you find that strange?
Well, he traveled with, I would, yes. Remember, big game hunting is a little different then than it is now.
Yeah. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was a big game hunter.
And E.H. Harriman on that trip, there were big game hunters on that as well. Now, Muir had a disdain for that. What he hated was, like on his trip with the Corwin, to see, people shooting walruses from the boat, that sort of thing. That detested him. To my knowledge, I'm unaware of him ever killing a single animal. But would that surprise me? Yeah, a little bit. Actually, that's a fact I did not know. I'll have to go and check that he traveled.
Okay, yeah, that one came in. Harold asked that question, and so yeah,
he's probably right. I just that's a fact I'm unaware of.
Okay. Another question that came in, were there any signs of any, I'll use the quote, affairs in Muir's life?
Well, yeah. He had another mistress. It was Mother Nature, but other than that, no,
Yeah, okay.
no,
And
absolutely
he was
not.
pretty loyal to that mistress too.
Yeah,
All right.
I don't think the boy had time.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I think that's about it for questions, Garrett. Other than I can tell you that we have this uh, population that wants you to come back again and do a series. So
Oh, that's very flattering.
we're
One
good.
thing, let me put in a plug for the John Muir House. Really, if
Yeah,
we live so close,
yeah.
it's a national treasure. It's really, really something that people should take. Take a couple of hours and go. It's a delightful place to visit, and it's just wonderful. And take a look at the paintings all around. Those are replicas of Keith's paintings. You can see why he loved them and I love them.
Yeah, and the National Park Service has redone their visitor center there. And so if you're interested in some Muir books, that's a great place to get them. And the setting of that house has always struck me. The trestle, the hills in the background, just good stuff. So I need to thank you for coming back and sharing another aspect of Muir's life. I had a blast the first time, and this one topped it. So thank you, Garrett. And thank you all for viewing this morning. We did have a question about where can we see that previous show from Garrett. And if you missed any of our programs, including that one, you can find them by visiting the museum's website at museumsrv.org. Today's program will appear probably early next week. Our next program will be on March the 17th. Yes, March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day at 11:30. So it's time to put on some green, open a Guinness for medicinal purposes, and celebrate the granddad. We will have Elizabeth Creeley from the Irish Consulate in San Francisco join us to talk about the Irish immigration to San Francisco during the gold rush. And we'll have also Dublin historian Steve Minier, who is coming back to us as well, who will talk about some of the Irish immigrants to the Valley. Michael Murray, Jeremiah and Eleanor Fallon. And if you know Fallon Road or Fallon Middle School, that's where that comes from. So you get to hear about how they came into that mix. And if you like these programs and want them to continue, we ask that you make a donation by going to the museum's homepage, museumsrv.org, and clicking on the Donate Now button. The museum is also in need of volunteers now that we're open full time. If you can give us some time, please contact the museum. I certainly hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. I know I did. Stay safe, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you on March the 17th.